Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead, and welcome to episode 118, Planning Summer Writing Part 2, Mapping Projects to Days. This is a follow-up episode to episode 117, where I looked at big picture summer planning for the summer of 2023. At the time that this episode is being recorded, it is in April of 2023. So it's definitely time to start thinking about what types of projects, if any, I'm going to do over the summer. And I want to put this out there that certainly some summers for me are busier than others in terms of writing. Some summers I make a good effort to get a lot of work done that I wasn't able to do during the year. So I might push hard to complete a couple of articles. I've called those completion projects and episodes in the past. There's an episode about your writing project mix that I did recently. I will link to that one in the show notes. That one talks about all the different types of projects you might consider doing when you're trying to figure out what type of project mix you want at any given moment. But for me, one of the other things that happens is some summers I do a lot of cleanup on those completion projects. So I might say have 3 projects outstanding, and I'm just going to use the summer to knock those out. Other projects I use for big picture items that I need to do that are more for playing the long game. And what I mean by that is that these are projects that aren't going to give me an immediate yield, but they're going to be a project that I'll continue to work on in the future. So what I'm going to do is also show you how I'm starting to think through what days am I actually writing in the summer, and then what am I doing on those days. There will be a part 3 follow-up where I talk about a more realistic writing schedule and certainly navigating interruptions that come from having kids at home for those of you that are academic parents and have to navigate any summer work around childcare or family travel or something like that. So I'll have more details on time use and an actual schedule once I get closer to the actual time for the summer. But today, I think it's really helpful to just look at what kinds of summer time is available. So by doing that, I am looking to see what days can I write and what days can't I write. And then there's always that middle ground of I might be able to get some writing done, but I just don't know yet. I think of those as sort of maybe days. And so what I'm going to do today is show on screen. So for those of you that are listening on audio, you can check this out in the show notes if you want to. But I do this different ways every summer because I really haven't found a perfect system. And so what I'm going to show on screen in a second is a Google Sheet template that is just it's basically a workbook that has months, all the months of the year for 2023, and it's scheduled out by the day. And I decided I'd experiment with using this as my little writing calendar for the summer. I don't know if I'll keep it for the full year, but I thought it would be something worth trying. And I will link to the same template that I'm using in the show notes because I definitely can see the appeal for using something like this because it's portable anywhere. You can kind of see where you are on your projects. I've mentioned before that I use a couple of different tools. I still like my paper planner for day-to-day things, but I also have big project steps in Asana, and I've done an episode on Asana before. I can put that one in the show notes. I know some of you have heard me talk about that. So there are other things that I'm using, but I kind of like this as an at-a-glance planning tool for how I'm going to map out my summer with writing projects. So what I'm going to show on the screen for those of you listening on audio is how I actually used this template. And so what's on screen right now is a copy of a Google Sheets calendar template. Again, I will link to it in the show notes. It was totally free. I really did not modify it other than putting a couple notes to the side. And so for me, when I think about summer for me really starts in 2 ways. I shouldn't say it only starts in one way, and this might be the same for you. Technically, my semester is over by the very beginning of May, so around the 2nd of May, somewhere around there. But then I still have this kind of great month for me as an academic parent where my children are still in school until the beginning of June. So I really, in many ways, try to treat May as sort of this golden time where I'm not teaching, but I have children occupied elsewhere that I can actually get some writing finished. And so what I'm showing on the screen right now is how I started thinking about May. And what I want to say about this summer that's different from other summers is that I have a little bit more freedom to think about big picture projects versus a lot of little projects. So I know I've mentioned on a previous episode that I'm using the month of April, the months of March and April of 2023 to finish our new website for Defend, Publish, and Lead. So you'll have to check that out. And so those were my writing projects occupying my time prior to this. Earlier than that, I was working on a revision of a book proposal. So for another book, that's my time management book for academic mothers. So that book proposal is in. I don't have the reviews back, so I know that that's something that will come back to me, and I may have to do something further. I'm sure I'll have to do something further with it, but I just don't know when that will be. So I'm at this unique point where I can think about some new projects. And for me, there are two projects I know I want to focus on. One, I am working on a book right now on academic writing project management, since this is now, certainly my growing area of interest at Defend, Publish, and Lead, and all the things that I talked to you about on the podcast. These are all pieces that are going in the book as I kind of figure out how I want to do that. So as a side note, anybody that's interested in academic writing project management, and if you have some burning questions you want to share with me or things you hope show up in this book, please don't hesitate to email me at christine@defendandpublish.com. I will leave a link in the show notes to that too. You can always contact me there, but I'm always looking for things you want to know how to do, but you don't know how to do, so I can work through this book. Because right now there aren't books on the market about academic project management in kind of a life system way. So I know I'm going to get that book proposal out. I've got a lot of the content drafted already, but I've put it aside for the last 6 months, and I know I want to come back to that. So in May, what I want to do is really lean into getting that proposal finished. So I know I have quite a bit of the writing already there, but I do need to package it. I need to see where I was the last time I worked on that project. And for me, that's really going to be a project from May into June. Another project I have to keep an eye out for is certainly what happens when those revisions come back or my feedback comes back on my other book. So I have to worry about that. So in May, I know those are things that I'm working on. Another thing that I'm working on that I have to think about this summer is that I will be on sabbatical, and I am doing a future episode on a sabbatical. So if you are on a sabbatical too, listen for that one. I don't remember what number it is, but I am doing an episode on a sabbatical. And I know for me to be ready to go on that sabbatical, I'm doing some research at another institution where I'm a visiting scholar. And so in that case, I have to have all my pieces ready for my study that I'm going to do at that institution, but I have to do all the groundwork for them now, really this summer. So that's something I'll talk about with the month of June in a second. So what's on the screen is basically a big Google sheet. It's got tabs at the bottom for every month. So January, February, March, April, etc. And so why I like this is it's set up by the day. So you just see May and all the days down the side. You see what day of the week it is, which I love, because to me, something like May 2nd means nothing to me unless I know, is that a weekday when I have children in school, or is that a weekend? And I've mentioned on the podcast before that in general, I just cannot get any writing completed on the weekends. I don't really try to do it unless I'm motivated and wake up really early before anybody else in my family. But otherwise, I just don't use weekends for writing. That's when I do all my teaching prep, all my class planning. But I have not been able to pull off scholarly writing on the weekends as a regular thing. So I have just decided to work within those confines. So what's on my screen in addition is two little boxes I added. So anybody can add what they want. One is just a list of what projects I'm doing in May. The other one is what kind of writing rules or writing schedule I wanted to make. And why I like to do this is I like to look at the calendar day by day when I'm planning a semester or a summer's worth of writing. And the very first thing I do is any days I can see on that calendar, there is no chance I am getting any writing done at all, I put an X through them. So what's on the screen right now, for those of you that are looking on YouTube, you can see that Friday, May 5th through Monday, May 8th, there's no writing happening. And I know why that is. There's a couple of family events, and there's also our graduation for our university falls in that time. So I just know there's nothing I'm going to be writing. So I just put an X through there. So one of the things I like about this system is it's just being realistic to know, yes, I can write this day. No, I can't. Rather than feeling guilty all day, why can't I write, or I should be writing, I just accept Friday, May 5th, it's not happening. and that's fine. So I know that sometimes people get very concerned when I do this with our clients because they're like, oh, but that means I only have 30 days instead of 52. And I'm like, yeah, you only have 30 days instead of 52. And it's sometimes, a reality check that's sometimes necessary, but in some ways I find it really liberating because I try to think then, okay, well, check this out. I'm looking at May. I don't have all of these days. There's actually a good bit of days I don't have in May just because I have a couple of trips and things in there. But I do have like nice little blocks. So Tuesday, May 2nd from Thursday, May 4th, that day, my children are in school. I don't have anything I'm doing. I'm not teaching. So I could, in theory, write from the second I lose some children to a school drop off at 8 o'clock. I could write till 2:40 if I want to. So I have these big, nice long stretches that I don't get them very often. So I know those are in there. But I also made a little writing schedule to myself to just say, if any day doesn't have an X on it, I'm going to work from 9 to 12. So 9 a.m. to noon, or I'm going to work 3 hours a day. So that might mean that day gets broken up for some reason. There's a random meeting, but I have to log 3 hours before I can leave work. That's what I'm doing. So I just made real general rules. You might have a much more messy schedule with meetings and finals and school drop-offs and pickups. So I kind of like just giving myself some general rules. I've mentioned a long time that my general rules, I like to write 10 hours a week. So sometimes I'll just say I have to do 10 hours a week. I don't care when it happens, but it's got to be 10. And then I track it somewhere to make sure that I'm hitting that 10 hours. Here, I'm just making anything that doesn't have an X on it. I've got to get 3 hours in a day, which is more than I normally do. And if I do more, great. Because I can totally see, and a lot of times in May, I do this where I camp out in the library. I've mentioned I like to write in the library. I'll camp out there for 4 hours or 5 because I so rarely get to do it that it's more exciting for me. It's probably not as exciting for some of you that do that all day long every day, if you're writing a dissertation or something like that. So a couple other things that I do is I start thinking about how I'm going to do the project I picked for May in the time I have. So I can talk about a more detailed schedule, like what do I do in actual writing sessions in a future podcast. That'll be our third segment for the summer writing planning series. But on screen, what I'm showing is if you look at something like Wednesday, May 10th, I have TOC on there because I know I want to start looking at my table of contents in this new book proposal that I'm working on. You see some other days I just have the words proposal on there. You see some days I have sample chapter written. I'm just loosely thinking about how much time do I need to devote to some of these things and so on. And then I go through the whole month that way. So certainly you can make these columns bigger, you can add more notes, but for me, I just want to see in broad strokes, how many days do I think will it take me to complete a project? And this is something that new scholars sometimes struggle to learn. We all know that everything takes longer than you think it will. So I might say, oh, I'm going to get that proposal knocked out in 3 days. That's not happening. I know it's not. And I tend to actually be a little bit more generous with giving myself time. And sometimes I finish up a little bit early because of that. But I can just see in here how these days are going to lay out. So other things I pay attention to with the X's would be things like this. I'm working on Friday the 12th, but I can't write again until Thursday the 18th. And that's because I've got a trip in there where I know I can't do any writing. So if that's the case, I know that there's going to be a little bit of a break between those two things. So I know on Friday the 12th, for example, I need to leave myself some really great notes because it's going to be almost a week later by the time that I get to write. And so I'm going to click over to June to just show the contrast because for me, May is I've got lots of time. I want to show you a month where I don't have hardly any time as a contrast. So right now for just listeners, I'm clicking over to June. And in June, one of the things that becomes really evident is I have a whole lot of days in there with X's flat out through them. This is partially because this is when we take a family vacation and there are many days with travel in there that it's just not possible. And I don't push myself to write. That's not to say I don't do any scholarly work. I might actually read. And that's something I know I've talked about on other podcasts, but sometimes on these days where I can't write, I make that more of a point to be a reading day. So for example, for a plane ride or for a long car ride or something, I might have something in there. So it's not that I'm not working, but it is that I'm not writing per se. So other things that are in here, you can see that on my calendar, I have between Tuesday the 6th and Wednesday the 14th, I have sort of long stretches in there where I'm working on a book proposal. I have an M on there on those days because that's during the family vacation as a maybe. And why I have an M on there is that I actually do get some writing done on a longer family vacation because a lot of times everybody sleeps in. Sometimes I've been thinking about an idea and I just want to work on it a little bit, but those are no pressure writing days for me. So if I don't do anything, on that book proposal, I don't care. It's totally okay. But I just put it on there so I remember I've got to pack the things I need to take with me in case I get an opportunity to write. And in general, on this particular vacation, I tend to get a couple of days of writing in. Maybe not a lot. It might be, 4 hours or 5 over the course of the vacation, but it definitely can happen. And sometimes I'm not prepared for it to happen. So I want to make sure that at least this summer I'm being a little bit more proactive. And then other things that are showing up on here is I really don't get back into writing in earnest till around the 19th of June. So just the front part of June is real busy with like travel. There's just a lot of days in there with all kinds of things like last days of school for my children, like a bunch of school events and things like that, I'm not gonna get some writing done. So this is not totally normal for June, but generally that first half of June, I'm not able to pull off a lot of writing. That's why I try to lean in very hard in May. But then I have some things in there, another project coming up, like setting up a faculty interview study. For my sabbatical, I'm working on these narratives of how faculty describe their writing processes. So if anybody wants to be a participant, email me at christine@defendandpublish.com. I'm happy to have you join me for it, but I know I have to design it. I have to submit all the institutional research board paperwork. I have to do all those kinds of things because I want to be able to have my study data before the end of the calendar year. So by December of 2023, I want to make sure that I have all my data so I'm ready to go when I start a sabbatical in January of 2024. So I didn't do July and August, and partially this is because one of the things that I know I'm waiting on are some revisions to my last book that was submitted, and I don't know what those are going to entail. So normally I will plan out July and August if I didn't have something that large kind of hanging over me, but for right now I'm just leaving those months not planned, and I think this would be a good way just to see for you. You might plan the first part of the summer up till, say, if you're in the US, July 4th is sometimes a good marker. You could do the first half of the summer and then the second half and reset if you want. So hopefully you found something like this useful just to see these very first preliminary steps in figuring out what projects do I want to do, what days I have available. I encourage you to check out episode 117 if you didn't listen to that one, because that's where I talk about how do I even know what I'm doing for the summer. I have changed my mind a little bit since then, based on some of the projects that I talked about on that episode, but this at least lets you see how I plan them. And as mentioned, I will put the link to the free template in the show notes. Happy writing.